Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis News from February 20th to the 26th. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future episodes. And there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. We're going to start with this news that we got out of Cannabis Policy, Education, and Regulation, reminding us what we already know, but more data helps, as data shows that GOP primary voters are more likely to choose candidates that support ending the federal cannabis prohibition. And so times are changing. Obviously, better to see it working in our favor, but elected officials must act now on a bipartisan federal framework for cannabis reform. Yeah, we would love to hear that. 68% of conservative Americans support ending the federal cannabis prohibition because, yes, the war on drugs has been a failure. And so nice to see. Thank you, Tom Engel, for sharing 3 Republican members of Congress, Rep. Dave Joyce, Brian Mast, and Nancy Mace, are celebrating the results of a new poll that shows a strong majority of likely 2024 GOP presidential primary and caucus voters support federal cannabis legalization. Well, we already know this. Good to see more Americans rallying around this issue, but politicians, we're tired of waiting. Please start to do something about it. And so with that, wanted to share this one from Stephen Dennis, who asks questions senators in hallways for business, Bloomberg business. But first thing on the docket out of this article from Bloomberg.com, so figured it's worth sharing, cannabis banking. Interesting. He could have started with spectrum sales, insulin pricing, pharmacy benefit manager, junk fees, but no, he started with that. And so a banking bill for cannabis businesses, could that be in the works? Obviously, we'd love to hear this rather than not, but interestingly enough, Bloomberg.com article will be in the description below if you wanted to read it. Well, we got this one from Tucson, Arizona, KOLD.com, but think of this, not like a big mainstream article, but a smaller, more local one sharing lawmakers' push to reform laws as majority of United States legalize cannabis. And luckily, they point out that one key bill will make it easier for cannabis companies to use regular banking. You don't say. And so most of this article seems to highlight that Rep. Earl Blumenauer of Oregon has pretty much picked up the torch where Ed Perlmutter left off out of Colorado, who recently retired. And so nothing that we don't already know on here, but just highlighting from a smaller, more local news outlet talking about safe banking for whatever reason. Obviously, Arizona would benefit because it's a state where cannabis is legal for rec and med. But nonetheless, good to see this in smaller local outlets, and hopefully we see more of it pick up on a mainstream sort of level as well. And so with that marijuana moment highlighting out of Arizona, speaking of them, Arizona retailers sold more than $1.4 billion in cannabis products in 2022, with December seeing record rec sales. And of course, we anticipate this, but happy to highlight the overall total cannabis sales for both markets since the advent of legal adult use in January 2021 is $2.9 billion. And so up from the roughly $1.2 billion they did in 2021. And so more on the details of the numbers below if you wanted to read through it, but just happy to share that overall numbers do continue to go up despite Weed Street 420 sharing this, as this one comes from Cannabis Benchmarks, a division of New Leaf Data Services. And so while we do like to see the year-over-year growth trend heading in the right direction in Arizona, week over week, apparently the prices are in free fall, which is better for consumers, obviously, getting cheaper access to a safer, non-addictive alternative, but not ideal for the operators that obviously have to operate with both hands tied behind their backs, plus 280E, plus all of these other obstacles, making it hard for them to be profitable. And so just sharing this because it's interesting. Arizona monthly average spot wholesale price flower going down, but fortunately markets do typically work in cycles, so it doesn't mean that it's always going to be heading down. But just adding this as well for some perspective from Canvestments, sharing a recent podcast from Cannabis Investing Network, episode number 163. Interesting discussion in AZ here pointed out that because there is no seed to sale tracking system in Arizona, it is speculated certain operators are bringing in cheap out of the state weed and selling locally, which is not ideal to hear. Obviously, didn't know that this was happening, but just sharing the news as we come across it. Before adding, essentially, there's no way for the state to prevent this. And so while that's an unfortunate reality of a lot of the markets in the West Coast where it's easy to grow illegal weed and compete with the legal markets, I figured I'd share this one from Split to Wig, because if this is true, this could be an indicator that we're nearing a bottom in the overall cycle, and things could be turning for the better, as perhaps the biggest signal in the cannabis industry right now, though license numbers are maintaining, growers are not replanting. So the current plant count compared to last month is on track to be down 70%. This is going to cause a supply shock in vapes, edibles, and flower. And so this is the image here. If you wanted to take a look, I believe this is from Oklahoma. Just before confirming the source, we're going to scroll down and highlight data sources, state METRC data from NCS. During non-planting December and Jan, we had 667 100,000 planted, and in Feb we had 166,000 a few days ago. This is predominantly greenhouse and indoor market. Yes, there are large farms, but the drop is the largest drop I've seen since we have had the data. And so, nonetheless, interesting to point out, but yes, this is from Oklahoma. So just one market example, but on top of that, could we see a supply shock where this is more sort of information like that coming out of another state? So thank you, Aaron Idlehype, for sharing this one, as prices for cannabis are now jumping in California on tight inventories due to lack of supply. But the bigger story is that inventories are falling throughout the western U.S. And again, could this be something that we're seeing in more than one market, Oklahoma, California? Figured I would share this. So from mindsetvalue.substack.com, cannabis shortages spread in the west from Oregon, Nevada, Colorado, and other states follow California. And so we would love to see this, because essentially this is going to see the overall price of cannabis, whether it's wholesale or retail, end up going back up in value closer to where we were in 2020, 2021. And so link for this will be in the description if you wanted to read it. But moving along, thank you, Jimmy Devine, for sharing this. Also a reality of just bad policy that we're seeing in California. And not to say that this should never happen, but this is unusual in a market where, thank you, Jimmy, for sharing this, California cannabis tax revenue dipped 87 million in 2022 Q4 compared to a year prior, per the stats just released by CDTFA. And so this wouldn't be an issue if they're obviously opening more legal outlets to compete with the illicit demand. Considering California's got 40 million people, you might as well open 10,000 dispensaries. But isn't this wild to see that in Q4 of last year, they did 308.56 million in tax revenue from all legal cannabis sources, and then Q4 of this year, they did 221.6 million. That's what you get when you don't open enough legal outlets to compete with the illicit market. And with 40 million people in California, you might as well have thousands of dispensaries to try and compete. And so, as the industry and small farmers struggle due to terrible policies making it more appealing and lucrative to go illegal as opposed to jumping through the regulatory hoops of the legal market, the tax revenue will continue to underperform. And so again, don't be like California with these ridiculous policies that make it anti-business, or this is what you're going to get. And so on to some MSO news. Trulieve Cannabis Corp to reschedule fourth quarter and full year 2022 results conference call to March 8th. So I believe it was going to be on the 1st. Now they're moving it to the 8th. They've explained all the reason why here. You can pause to read if you're interested. But so to highlight now, it's going to be Wednesday, March 8th at 8:30 EST, following the release of fourth quarter and full year 2022 financial results. And so not sure, well, I mean, they explained it in here. Hopefully this doesn't necessarily have to do with bad reporting, and we would love to see that they've finally implemented the harvest assets and gotten back to cash flow positive, but we're going to have to wait and see if Trulieve manages to pull that off. Well, we've got this from Jerry Derivani, and I've got another Yahoo Finance article put in the description as well, but just a bit of an update on some of the beef going on in the cannabis business world. But apparently the beef between Jason Wild and Riv Capital has been settled, and so while I'm not a shareholder in any of these companies, so it doesn't bother me much, just figured I would share a bit of the news on the development. Link will be below in the description for more details from that article if you wanted to read more. But with that, another interesting one from Babel Dev, which is apparently your friendly neighborhood stock market news monitor, most mentioned cannabis-related stocks in news coverage over the past 9 months. And so, unfortunately, not surprising to see still Canadian LPs that happen to have exposure onto larger U.S. markets still holding the title at number one. But wanted to use this time to just highlight that while Canadian LPs do get more exposure and are talked about a little bit more, the U.S. MSOs are the real opportunities once a lot of what is keeping their hands tied behind their backs gets unlocked. 280E, the discriminatory federal overhang, because these companies are making way more money quarter over quarter than the Canadian LPs. That is just a fact. Hundreds of millions of US dollars versus tens of millions in Canadian dollars. So you cannot make this shit up. And while the LPs get all the attention in the short term for being on the US exchanges, obviously we're looking at the real opportunity here when the discrepancy in value versus share prices is finally recognized, when these MSOs get the handcuffs taken from behind their backs and finally get treated like other businesses in the US. And so with that, on to state news. Marijuana Policy Project, thanks for sharing this. As South Carolina medical cannabis bill clears first committee stop, and so good to see progress out of South Carolina. We'll update this as this moves along, but happy to share this quote from Kevin Caldwell, MPP Southeast Legislative Manager. The people of South Carolina have consistently shown that they support legalized medical cannabis for a safer, non-addictive medicinal alternative to opioids that kill hundreds of thousands last year. Not ideal, and deserve to see this legislation debated in both houses of the legislature. Yes, that is true. Good to see some lawmakers finally working for the people in South Carolina as well. Well, we've got this one out of North Carolina. Thank you, Tom Engel, for sharing. These articles will be below if you want to read, but today the North Carolina Senate Finance Committee approved a bill to legalize medical cannabis one day after it cleared a separate panel. So again, medical, first step for a lot of these southern states before they go rec, but good to see them taking these steps as the legislation has one more stop before hitting the Senate floor and potentially becoming law in North Carolina. So love to see it, and we'll update you. Well, we got this one. Thanks, Tom Engel, for sharing just now. The New Hampshire House of Reps approved a bipartisan bill to legalize cannabis for adult use, it appears, that's sponsored by the Republican Majority Leader and and Democratic Minority Leader. So love to see bipartisan teamwork coming together and making common sense legislation for the people of New Hampshire. So again, more on this if you wanted to read, and we'll update you as the situation develops over time. Well, thank you for sharing this semi-evolved mammal, because we've always got to get a kick out of New York. Interesting stat, pay attention, New York State Office of Cannabis, as the illicit market store growth the past month went from 1,400 to 1,500 apparently, as a new recent NewYorkPost.com article shares that Eric Adams, mayor of New York, begs Albany for pot crackdown help as illicit stores reach 1,500, which is up from what was reported last month at 1,400. In addition to targeting kids for sales, illegal weed sellers have themselves become prime targets for robberies, making it seem like the mayor cares more about illegal growers than legal ones, because the legal market only saw the growth from 1 store to 2 over the past month. So the illicit market managed to open 99 more stores. How pathetic out of New York. And let this be a perfect example, JT in LA's comment on how the media can take data and distort it in a way that makes it seem like it's right, but they're only showing you a half truth. Because if you talk about the illicit market growth, you could say, oh, but it's only a 7.1 growth rate for the illegal ones, so they're not growing as quickly as our legal market is growing, 100% growth rate, because we went from 1 to 2 as opposed to 14 to 1,500. And so let that be a little bit of a lesson. You always want to read, yourself to get all the details and how the media presents this data in headlines versus, what you actually get when you read the whole story. But, just got to laugh at New York and hope that one day it will get better. I imagine we can, eventually turn it around. Not we can, but someone will. But with that, Cannabis Business Times sharing common sense policy out of Washington State as well, as the Senate passes bill to bar hiring discrimination for cannabis use. No doubt, if you consume a beer a night or a glass of wine, you should be able to consume a joint and then come to work the next day, not stoned because there's no hangover, and do your job, without anyone having a second guess or taking a second glance. And so good to see this pass in Seattle Times. More on this below, but just common sense policy, happy to highlight it. And with that, the Dales Report sharing powerful testimony delivered by former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura extolling the virtues of cannabis oil. Ventura testified before a Minnesota House committee in an effort to advance efforts to legalize the plant in the state. And so we love to see that efforts are moving through Minnesota, hopefully sooner than later, maybe by April they can get this done. But just going to share this clip as it's a good one.
Saved my life.
Especially
saved
from a former governor.
My life. Not me personally. It saved the First Lady, the 38th First Lady of Minnesota, about 10 years ago, developed late in life seizure disorder. My wife of 47 years was seizing 2 to 3 times a week. And I'm dead serious on this. These seizures were nothing to laugh at. You hold the person, you're helpless. You make sure they're breathing and they don't swallow their tongue. 2 to 3 times a week, my wife is doing this. We went to the doctors. They put her on 1 seizure medicine. Didn't work, horrible side effects. A 2nd seizure medicine. Didn't work, horrible side effects. A 3rd seizure medicine. Didn't work, horrible side effects. A 4th seizure medicine. Did not work, horrible side effects. In desperation, I have a home in Mexico and friends in Colorado. We drove to Colorado. And I'll add, she had a seizure the night before we got to Colorado in the motel. We got to Colorado, our friends had the legal cards, they went and illegally bought for her 3 drops under the tongue. I can tell you from that day forward, my wife, the First Lady of Minnesota, has not had a seizure since.
So talk about the benefits of having access to a safer, non-addictive medicinal alternative. And while it's easy to say, why didn't he legalize when he was governor? Easier said than done, and at least it's good to see Minnesota making these efforts now. And so we'll update you. Hopefully we'll see that sooner than later. And with that, Tom Engel, thanks for sharing out of Iowa, a state where you least expect it. House Minority Leader, Minority Whip, and other lawmakers filed a bill to legalize cannabis. Not just medical, but apparently adult use as well. So this is early out of Iowa, but figured I'd share because it's, again, a state that you'd sort of least expect it. Good to see them turning around and obviously seeing the benefits from other states around them. So link below if you wanted to read in the description. So we move on to Florida. This one comes out of the Office of Medical Cannabis Use for this past week. If we look at dispensaries opened from February 20th to the 24th, we can see a lot were opened. Green Dragon in St. Petersburg, INSA opened 1 in Lake Placid, Move opened 2 stores. This is backed by Verano in Winter Springs and West Palm Beach, and then Sunnyside, backed by Cresco Labs, opened new stores in Orlando and West Palm Beach as well. They increased their qualified patient count up to 792,153, which represents a week-over-week increase of 2,191 patients, so nice to see that number back up over the 2,000 mark, as we typically do see it outside of certain seasonal months. While if we scroll down, dispensations for February 7th 17th to the 23rd. We can see all the MSOs listed in the state, the number of active dispensary locations they have in operations, and then weekly the number of milligrams of THC sold, milligrams of CBD sold, and ounces in smokable flower sold this past week. And so all the data is here and you can keep track week over week. But at the same time, while I usually feature Pierre Gilles, and I will put his links in the description just because he's one of the OG sources and I want to feature him, Cannasewers.io shared this, and it almost seems like they took his data and just put it into another graph. So just a different way to digest the information, but figured I'd share it because it's cool. Florida OMMU medical cannabis Feb 2024 or Feb 24, 2023 sales percentage by market share for the week by company. Trulieve holding on top spot for both flower and concentrates, with Air coming second on both. Nice to see Air slowly picking that up. Curaleaf third in concentrates, and third tied with Verano and smokable flowers OZ sales. And so figured I would share this, comparing THC sales and then ounces of smokable flower here on the right side. And so with that, moving along, Puff Daddy, thank you for sharing this. As the cannabis experience becomes the nation's first cannabis licensed consumption bus, what do you think about this? Are you eager to get on a bus where you can smoke cannabis, or would you rather do it in a lounge or preferably on your balcony outside your apartment? What do you think? Let me know in the comments, but figured I'd share this as we're seeing more firsts that are helping normalize this industry, at least in slight ways. But, Colorado, thank you for trying out all these things first. We love trailblazers like you. And so with that, Empaxia, I wanted to share this because it does highlight the reality that we could have been using hemp for a lot of things for a long, long time. And just because of propaganda and unfortunately false, unreal beliefs about the plant has caused a lot of delay in using the sustainable resource. But thanks for highlighting this, Empaxia. Hemp is truly amazing, a sustainable resource to watch for the future. For many things, I've highlighted this in many videos in the past, especially the series I made in 2020, Reality Check Cannabis in 2020. But New York Times finally speaking some truth to this. In search of sustainable materials, developers turn to hemp. You've got hempcrete, you've got cloth, rope, you got oil, you got all this all this stuff. I'm not going to go through it just because I can't think of it off the top of the dome. But studies before we end off, this one from Normal. Survey, cannabis provides relief, so survey, not study, but less need for prescription medications in nerve pain patients. And so that is promising, as patients suffering from Charcot-Marie-Tooth CMT disease in Pennsylvania, a genetic nerve pain disorder, frequently report that cannabis use mitigates their pain and decreases their need for prescription medications, according to data published in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. So it seems like access to a safe and non-addictive medicinal alternative is beneficial for these nerve patients as well. As a team of investigators affiliated with the Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine in PA surveyed 56 patients with CMT. So again, small sample size, but better than not, as over 90% of respondents, over 90% said that cannabis use reduced their average pain by at least half. That is a huge finding. So love to see that. And again, we deschedule, see more studies like this. We can find the positive medical benefits and actual science behind cannabis sooner than later, which I think would be great for everybody. 80% of respondents reported using fewer opioids following the initiation of cannabis therapy, another massive plus. 69% of study participants reported reducing their use of sleep aids, and 50% reported using fewer anxiety and antidepressants. So it's still just a self-reported study. These findings speak volumes to how cannabis can replace traditional opioids in a lot of ways, and why Big Pharma is so scared of the floodgates opening, and why they've been lobbying against cannabis becoming legal for so long. They don't want their market share eaten up by a plant that people didn't have to pay for in the first place. Well, we got this one from Todd Harrison. Thanks for sharing. And while I typically hesitate to share anything from CBC, Canada's Broadcasting Corporation, because they've been bought since 2019 by our federal government, so it's essentially just become a propaganda network, they do highlight a documentary that has some truth to it, as how we get high. Our bodies are perfectly primed for consuming cannabis, yes, thanks to our endocannabinoid system, which unfortunately does not get taught as much as it should be. But just like circulation, respiration, or immune regulation, the endocannabinoid system is so basic to life that it can be found in all animals except insects. And I believe the role for the endocannabinoid system is to help bring the body back into homeostasis. And so is it possible that if we're not able to produce our endocannabinoids, let's say over time as we get older, we fail to produce them as well ourselves? Is that why cannabis is there, so that we can consume it and then, get the endocannabinoids that we're not getting? I don't know, just thinking out loud. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. But interestingly enough, while CBC has sucked for the last few years, nice to see them showing something that's potentially true for once. Well, we got this one from High Times, as apparently a study finds that terpene levels in cannabis affect patient outcomes. And hey, no wonder, the more we research it and look into some of the smaller nuances and details about this, turns out we find out more medicinal benefits as opposed to not. And so that's why we ought to deschedule this damn plant sooner than later, as symptom relief was greatest after consumption of plant variants with slightly higher than average levels of the terpenes myrcene and terpinolene and non-detectable levels of CBD, researchers wrote. So interesting nonetheless. As a long-time joint smoker and someone that doesn't pay attention to a lot of this new stuff, be great if we can actually find, real solid data behind any of this backing it up. No doubt, I sort of just said that as we got into this. But nonetheless, you can pause to read more about this study. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Link will be below if you wanted to read through it, but also more here. Pause to read if you wanted to read. And then last bit, you can pause to read as well for last bit of the details from that study. And so last but not least, we've got a very interesting write-up from an anonymous on reddit.com about how British American Tobacco, Altria, and the Koch brothers have conspired with nearly every U.S. cannabis operator through the lobbying system to privatize and monopolize the cannabis industry. According to this person, the deal is imminent. So all we can do is wait and see. But I gotta say, I had a lot of fun reading through this, not because I believe it's all true, but mad respect to this person for putting in the research and putting the receipts to back up their claims. But at the same time, I want to read as many perspectives as I can to try and come to as much of an accurate conclusion of what's actually happening based on hopefully accurate information. And so, just a little bit of detail. I'm sorry, Don Murphy, I was wrong. You're not a nobody. What could that mean? And while this sounds beneficial for us investors, and we would love for safe banking to be a Trojan horse, not because, it's going to make us money, but at the same time, it helps right past wrongs. It makes America safer. It gets all this cash off the street. It helps mom and pop shops actually get an opportunity in this industry, equal access to opportunity. That's all these things that we're for. Unfortunately, Congress, whose job is to help the American people and not these industries, well, we've seen who they're working for. So just wanted to share this nonetheless. I recommend you grab the link below and read through it because it's super interesting. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What do you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it, subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Wednesday for a midweek update. Have a great weekend, everybody.